To the show, Jeff. Great to have you here and discuss your footy experience and chat about footy today. I'd like to actually start with just discussing actually your current role at Williamstown there and what it involves.
Thanks, Jock, and thanks for having me on, mate. I've been a fan of the podcast and listened to quite a few episodes, so it's nice to come on and meet you. The role's just a newly created one. I was assistant coach to Justin Plapp in the men's program last year, but they've created a new role which is titled coaching director / list manager, and basically it's still doing the hands-on coaching in the men's program. So as an assistant coach and doing the team defence and the back line. But also then working with all of the coaches across the club, so men's and women's, and working on the development of those coaches and helping Penny in who's a senior coach in our women's program, helping her and helping all of her assistant coaches. So a bit of a broad-reaching role across both programs, as well as doing the list management and recruiting in the men's. So so it was a busy time leading up to and post draft, but now just getting stuck into the coaching aspects of working in both programs.
With the list management side of things, obviously, as you just mentioned, it would have been a really busy time in the off season for you. Walk us through a bit of the process for you at a VFL club and how you go about that and the things sort of take place during that time to get your list how you want it.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, the first part is evaluating where you're at. It's VFL. I'm sure every VFL club would agree that all of the local clubs come knocking on the door of our players during the year and at the end of the year. So, first and foremost is retaining your talent. But there's that transition of blokes will go and get good offers, and probably the step back in commitment is appealing to go back to local footy. So once you can sort of work out where your list is at, for us, the last couple of years things have changed a little bit with the under-22s. For those that aren't aware, every team, AFL aligned and non, has to put out 6 under-22 players every week. So that changes a bit of the list demographic that Williamstown's probably had traditionally over the years, where they've been more of a an older type list. So there's that to consider, which basically means who are the best kids that have missed out on the draft, and then getting if you've got 12 under-22s on your list and you're playing 6, they all can't play in the back line or the forward line, or and not many of them get straight into the midfield. So it's getting a mix of ages, talent, positions on the ground, and then basically the senior part of your list is who's been cut off an AFL list, who still wants to get back to an AFL, in an AFL program, and the VFL and Williamstown we see as a good vehicle for those players wanting to do that. So there is a bit of a needs basis in terms of what types of players do we need, but anyone coming off an AFL list is generally going to be able to make us better. So it's we're all unfortunately shopping in the same supermarket for the same players, and it gets pretty competitive, and you've just got to be able to put across a good case to why a player would come and play with you.
So if you're, say, coming from an elite under-18 program and you didn't get drafted and you're looking to get into, obviously, elite competition like the VFL, so do you find those players, do they reach out to someone like you, or is it more the other way around, coaches reaching out to these players? What's the sort of the dynamics of that?
It really is a bit of both. It's really, we'll identify we have good relationships with a lot of the recruiters. So those relationships, once the draft is over, you've really got a good idea on who's missed out, and have a conversation with the recruiters on their opinions of players, and then managers will contact myself or Justin Plapp, our coach. We're lucky at Williamstown that we've had basically more players drafted than any other VFL club. So there's that, and I think that's had a fair bit to do with going deep into finals each year, and players are able to showcase their strengths on the at the big end of the year and in the big games. So we'll certainly touch base with the players that we look to bring into the program, but we get quite a few players, managers, even under 18, where you are now at the Falcons. Those type of coaches will touch base and recommend a player, and then we sort of have lots of players to sort through, and we've probably gone about it a little bit differently this year, that we've brought a few more in and looked at quite a few more over pre-season, and really happy with the talent that we've brought in so far.
And you'll finalise your list, is it early March or for the men's comp in particular?
Yep.
Or, yeah. Yep. And the women's obviously all set to go now. Yep.
Yep. It is. Yeah. So in terms of the men's, we've had a good block pre-Christmas. We'll come back and the next block is really, having a look at everybody, in game situations and working out who makes it and who just misses out, unfortunately.
Now, with the other side of the role, as you discussed, sort of developing your coaching team, both men's and women's, what are sort of some of the things you've done? Are you thinking of doing this year that you think will have a good impact on those coaches?
Yeah, basically, one of the things in the last couple of years that I've enjoyed doing as a development coach is working on an individual development plan for players. And that's, what are you good at? What are you, what's that limiting factor that's probably stopping you taking the next step as a footballer? And then working out the plan to improve both their strengths and those sort of limiting factors, and doing the same for coaches. You basically, there's so many different skills from, running a presentation to using sports code, the software that we all do our editing with. And especially in the women's program, not a lot of the coaches have had experience in some of the aspects of they're going to be required to do this year. So it's just working with them, sort of providing them with resources, education sessions on the software. I sit at the back of the room when they run a meeting, and I might take a bit of vision of them, taking the meeting and then give it to them, and we'll both work on how do you think you went. So it's just, again, being that resource and I guess that older head and some feedback to the coaches, because they're just our players. I suppose the players, their performance day is game day, whereas the coaches have to perform on training sessions and have to get the message across and do the work and do and present well to the players. So that's, I guess, where I see my role in helping the coaches across all the programs.
A broader question for you, but what are some of the key principles for you in producing better and more consistent football?
Better and more consistent football. I think it's about when you, especially from the training. I'm a big believer that you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training, and it's consistently training our players. And this is part of what I believe and try to teach our coaches, is that when you're running a drill, you want to be consistently have that drill just on the edge of the player's capability. Do you know what I mean? So that they're always, it's not too easy, which they disengage, and certainly not too hard, because they disengage then as well. So just continually stepping up that challenging aspect to the training, so that brings about the continual growth and improvement. And then when they get into the game situation, they've been at the upper echelon of their capabilities in their training, and that's I think gives you the best chance to be able to bring that out on game day. Have you
seen is there any common coaching mistakes you've seen across the journey that you might be able to point out for listeners?
Yeah, I guess the one for me, and having, I'll back this up by, I did a year under Choco at Choco Williams at Werribee. So a couple of these are, Choco's, I'll pay credit to him for the ideas, but he was big on never really having to do a running block to get fit. He was big on doing running with the balls. And we'll work really closely. And I understand community clubs aren't in the position with GPS units, etc., but we'll work closely, for instance, with our high performance guys, so that they need to tick off so many high speed meters in a session. And we try to get that done with the balls, with the drills. And if we've been successful, they don't need to top up at the end of the session. So the players, as you'd be well aware, mate, they're far more engaged when there's a ball out than when they have to put the balls down and just do the running. And I see that as sometimes, coaches just, not doing all that they could to ensure the session is got as many touches as they possibly can. So I'm not a big believer that you have to just run to get fit. I think you can run with the balls, and I think you'll get a bit more out of the players, from both aspects, footy wise and fitness wise, if you've got the balls out.
Yeah, I think I'm a believer in that too. And obviously you've coached at community level as well, and you've only got a couple of sessions and maybe a third if you're lucky, an hour and a half or so. Like, when you think about it, it's not many hours, even in a pre-season. If you add them up, there isn't that many before you start playing footy games, let alone during the season. So I think Choco, he's probably spot on with that, particularly community football. I think, at least obviously at the AFL level, you got the full-time athletes, different story. But and VFL is probably a bit in between somewhere, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, it is. It is. But even the warm-up, you know what I mean? You can have the balls out in the warm-up, and it can be fun and engaging. And that is one thing I think, as you say, you've only got an hour and a half. You know what I mean? So in that hour and a half, you have to do a warm up. There has to be a fitness component, and they have to touch the balls as many times as possible. So I'm a believer in getting it all in as best you can.
If you're trying, for coaches listening, and if you're advising on how to create sort of a fun environment during training, what are some of the tips you might have? Is it, just playing games or competitiveness, or what are some of the things you would recommend, even for particularly new coaches who might want to try and produce that sort of fun atmosphere? The players are fully engaged and enjoying their session.
I think you could play. Coaches can get a bit confused with the fun. It just has to be laughing and frivolity. Like players, in my experience at community and VFL and sort of pathways, they want to get better. They're there to get better. Do you know what I mean? So if you do get that challenge component to your drills right, they'll find it challenging, which is engaging, and they'll they don't have to be laughing and cracking jokes the whole night to walk off saying, yeah, I enjoyed that. And if they can feel themselves getting better. That's the big one for me. So so small, games where they're actually, break the game down into a certain aspect and two teams, and if it's too easy, make it in a smaller space. If it's too hard, a bigger space, or change the number variants. But that's the best way I find. If the players walk off and they've been challenged and they think that I might have improved in that session, or I can notice that I'm doing it a little bit better than I was 2 weeks ago. That's the thing that they'll really enjoy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I've said in this podcast before, but I think the greatest enjoyment and sort of happiness you get is when you're improving and when you're growing. And there's plenty of gurus around the world probably say similar. And I totally agree. Like you think back to your footballing, the most enjoyable memories of when you managed to kick multiple goals for the first time, or you managed to get your first 30 touches, or keep your opponent goalless, whatever it is. That's the most enjoyment, isn't it? When you get that growth. And I think you're spot on with the training. I think if they manage to go hit a few targets in a row without making, keeping the ball off the deck sort of thing. Absolutely. I'm spot on with that regards.
Yep. Yeah. For me, even all of the best times there's been a challenging aspect to it. Do you know what I mean? And it's the overcoming and, I've got better, and we're raising the bar to the next time. So I 100% agree with you there.
Is there a coach in the AFL who you look to from afar, or even work with, that you really sort of admire, and why is that?
I must admit I have admired Damien Hardwick, just because I think he's had an enormous amount of success in that 4-year period. But it was an 8-year period to get to that. You know what I mean? So it was a long time coming to be, the overnight success. And I liked that it was a build, and probably Melbourne are a little bit the same. They had that 4 year ago, 2018, where they built, but then it was all built on, they built a brand that was going to stack up in finals. You know what I mean? And they continually just improved their list. And then I guess from the outside, you look at Damien Hardwick, and he just changed up things a little bit when he was probably thinking, if I don't get it right this year, I'm going to get the arse. And so he's pretty brave in changing the way that he interacted with the players and the things that they did in the culture and connection space. And I think he led the way for a lot of us in that sort of area, and sort of built a dynasty in doing so.
It's interesting. I think I reckon in 2010 when he started out in his first season, I remember saying my mates, I thought that Richmond team was probably the worst team I've ever seen. It was a bad team, wasn't it? I think they lost the first 10 games. I don't know how many they end up winning, maybe 2 or 3 if they're lucky. And to turn that around, it's an interesting conversation too. You look at these great coaches, the Hardwicks, the Clarkos. I always look back to even their drafts too. Like Hardwick nailed his first draft. I think that's a big impact, isn't it, on a coach's journey? If you can get that right too, talking about list management, if you can get that right, like his first pick is Dusty Martin. Like it's just, how lucky is that as a coach? You get the best player of the decade pretty much roll into your hands. But there's no doubt Hardwick has done an incredible job, hasn't he, from building that club. And like you mentioned, 8 years took really to win a flag. That's a long time, isn't it? You think 8 years ago what you've done, he's working at that, chipping away. It's an amazing story. Yeah,
it is. And you're right. And for me also, I'm a bit of a fan of the it was the whole club. You know what I mean? They got their recruiting department right, as you just mentioned. If they, the assistant coaches, they turned them over and brought in some new ideas and, list management. And then, I know Shane McCurry works in the culture and connection space, and Emma Murray works in the mindfulness space. So they went and got really good people, and they all just, let them do their job. And and the results were evident. They don't, the year before they'd won it, where they finished, down the ladder, they didn't change the list much, and then they're winning a flag the next year. So something changed, and it was pretty significant for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think that list, I'll come out clean. I thought at the start of 2017, I wasn't really bought in on that list. I thought it was a mid-range team at best. And it must, and even bring us back to VFL and any competition, but it gives teams obviously hope, but like, you never know what you have, do you, on your list really, and how much you can get out, especially if you can get that sort of few percent out of a whole list improvement. It's amazing what teams can do. And I look at the AFL competition and I think, I don't think Adelaide, even though they finished basically bottom last year, they're not that far off making finals, if you, in my mind anyway. And the gap between Adelaide and Melbourne, I reckon it's probably never been closer in the AFL comp anyway, in the men's, in my mind, coming into this season. So it's going to be a fascinating season, I think, for a lot of teams.
I think it is, and I think it's what have we been, 20 years of equalisation, or 25 years of, the system's set up to make everybody equal. You're not supposed to stay up there for too long, and if you're not supposed to be down there for too long. And clubs are just getting better at getting good people into recruiting and mismanagement, and getting the development of players in, because how many clubs do we talk about historically where they had number one picks, but they just didn't develop them? And you only need one or two of those picks to go from good players to becoming best players in their position in the competition, and the whole team turns around pretty quickly. If a couple of, I call them B graders, become A graders, well, then things change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So gives us all a bit of hope, mate.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's always interesting. I was actually me being a bit of a geek on this, but I love looking at the draft and looking through the first rounders and the amount of weight that's put on a first rounder. And if you go back through, start back from 2013, 2014, roll back to 10 years previously, nearly half of them, you would say, inverted brackets, are busts. Like, it's amazing how hit and miss the top end talent is. And I guess back, particularly Hawthorn, probably 10 years ago, really probably didn't invest much in the draft after they absolutely nailed it early on. But, there's a lot of risk, isn't there, with a draft pick? And talking about building a list, basically, you look through it. If you go pull out those draft picks, the top 10, nearly half of them have pretty ordinary careers. And then you got the superstars amongst that. But it's amazing, isn't it? Getting that right to getting it wrong. And if you're a coach, the reality is, if you miss a few of those, it can make a really tough time to get that success you want.
100%. And it's just players just develop at different speeds. You know what I mean? And mate, fast forward 2 years after the last 2 years we've had with COVID, and it's going to be an even bigger lottery to draft because players just haven't played. So, that's what I'm seeing for the next 2 years. The things we're talking about with, top picks being busts might be even more so, or there might be a lot more little, diamonds in the rough that'll play a year or two of state league footy. I think Clayton Oliver was quite a late developer in his last year, in the pathway, where, with COVID last year, he might not have, if there's a Clayton Oliver out there, he might not have got picked up. So, yeah, you're right. And the state, that's where, the state league's great because we get those late developers to come in that they're still desperate to get drafted and they've got the great attitude and they keep working hard enough. They're playing against the AFL listed players every week. The good ones can get there. Yeah,
absolutely. Is there a player you've come across that has sort of exceeded your expectations of them? And you might have coached them or just seen them from afar. And how do you think they did that and sort of gone beyond what most people would have sort of penned them in as and the level they could get to?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough probably in the last 3 years that I've sort of worked in footy. I've had a couple, and the first example is Jake Riccardi. So Jake comes to Werribee at the end of 2018. He's still playing in the NAB League, but he played 2 games of VFL footy at the end. And Jake, would be the first to put up his hand and say he'd struggled a bit in those 2 games. Probably played 1 forward and 1 back, and didn't compete as hard as we would have liked. And then he comes to Werribee as a senior VFL player come 2019. And, you know, I've got a big belief that the blokes who, you know, have, let's say, a question mark about their competitiveness, that's one of the things that can definitely be overcome for the blokes who work hard enough at the game. And Jake was first on the track, last off, worked really hard on his game and all aspects of his game, and sought feedback and honest feedback. And yep, we need to get better in this area. And there was a little bit of opportunity too in that we sort of went into the 2019 year at Werribee not knowing who our key forwards were going to be because we'd lost the senior experience. And, you know, Jake stepped up and took the mantle and was the second leading goal kicker in the comp. So he was one that, you know, and the second one was last year at Williamstown, and maybe a little bit of a question mark on his competitiveness. We threw him down back, and, you know, he'd turn up to every meeting with his notepad and he'd write notes, and he'd get out and work really hard on his strengths and the areas that he needed to. And both of those boys just had an, you know, insatiable appetite and you know, for doing the work. And they both just had really good years that the recruiters couldn't ignore. So there's a couple of recent examples that have sort of, you know, I've worked with, and yeah, a couple of ripping kids.
You've mentioned a couple of things, but is there any other sort of maybe myths or mistakes in training that you see? And this might go from community to, you know, the more elite level where you are now.
I guess that one of the mistakes that coaches can come across on a regular basis is that, you know, a player will do something in a game, miss a spoil, do you know what I mean? And, oh, it's frustrating for the coach. But the question I ask all of our coaches, and this is an is when was the last time you trained that spoiling? Oh, you know, and so all of the things that the players need in their kit bag, and some of the things they pull out every week, and you know what I mean, that skills that they need. But there's some skills that they only pull out every 2 to 3 weeks, which is a diving spoil or whatever. You've still got to train them. You know what I mean? So you've got to make sure that every 6 to 8 weeks, all of the things that you're asking the players to do in a game, they've had some sort of practice. And that's I think something that gets overlooked a fair bit, that individual aspect to where you're asking a player to play and the tools that they have in their kit bag that they need to pull out, make sure they get the practice in each of those. Now, some will need to be a lot more regular than others. You know, you might do something 2 or 3 times for the year, but they still need to get those reps in, or, you know, when the time comes in the big occasion, they won't have done the reps, they won't have the confidence, and they won't be able to execute the skill that we need them to.
I think actually you'd be able to probably confirm this. I had Tom Perrott on here a few episodes ago on the show, and he mentioned when he was there, and you would have been there at the same time, I'd imagine, with Choco.
We missed each other.
Oh, you missed each other. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when he said Choco had him do something along the lines of basically an Excel spreadsheet with all the skills you would have a player need to use throughout the course of the season, and, you know, how sort of each week you have to tick off whether you practice those skills. And that sort of really resonated with me. I just sort of thought, you know, you might, if you don't practice spoiling across the goal line, how do you expect a player to nail that come quarterfinal in at the end of the season, sort of thing? So yeah, I really like that. And I don't know if he had you do something similar or not, but definitely resonated.
Mate, he did, and that's something that I've implemented with our coaches. And the first part of it is getting the coaches to think of the different skill sets. Do you know what I mean? And talk to, you know, get players come back to you. You sit down, you have a meeting with your backline players. What are all the skills you could have? And, you know, they'll nail the first 8, but then the last 10 they won't, or, you know, they might need a bit of prompting. But okay, and then at least if it's in the player's mind and the coach's mind, they've got the, you know, and they're practicing it on that regular basis. And when we set up training for tonight, have a look at that list. Oh, actually, we haven't done, you know, the goal line spoiling for 8 weeks. Pretty important. It might cost us a game coming up, so we need to get that done. So yeah, you're right. It's a good tool, and it's a good thought-provoking tool that I certainly get all of our coaches to do.
It's amazing the detail, like, if some coaches can get to. I've been my recent reading has been a bit of John Wooden, of course, from American basketball, college legend. But just the story about him showing the players how to tie the shoelaces, and it's a bit it's pretty extreme, but it just sort of points out, which they discussed, like how thorough he was with his preparation with his team. And I guess that carried across, and he won, you know, 10 out of 11 championships and absolutely dominated an era. So it is amazing the detail some of these I guess, the real high level coaches go to get the results.
Yep. Yeah. And even for community coaches, you can be sitting there and we've got the tools. You can be driving in the car and you can get your voice message out, and you know what I mean? Get all those things listed down. So, as a coach, I'm pretty sure you'd be the same. We're always in our heads working on the next thing and how can we get better and how can we make that player better. And yeah, I think, you don't want to be creating work for yourself because, it's a bloody time consuming job, but, having that attention to detail and being thorough, it does pay you back in the long run, in terms of, the performance of your players for sure.
Speaking of time consuming, do you have maybe a couple of tips for coaches listening on how to save time? Is there anything you've come across that really just saved an hour here or half hour there?
Yeah, look, so, I would start with an Excel spreadsheet for a training session. And then, you just go to the next tab, the next tab, the next tab. And then, just spending a 5-minute period at the end of a training session to rate a drill. New drill comes in, or we might change this next time, and it was a 7 out of 10. But the time will come 6 months down the track, 12 months down the track, where you need a drill for something, and if you've got that history of it, or even just this was a great training night. So what were the elements to that great training night? Instead of having to reinvent the wheel, because you coach for a year, 2 years, becomes 4, becomes 6, becomes 8 pretty quickly. And if you've done something like kept a record of all of your training session, you'll be able to go back and you won't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you're sitting down trying to work out what the players are doing. So keeping a good record of coaching, what worked, what you did, and a bit of a drill diary, it serves you really well down the track.
Do you have a couple of favorite drills that you like to run personally?
Yeah, we've got a drill that Michael Barlow brought from Gold Coast, so it's called the Glitter Strip, the Gold Coast Glitter Strip. So it's basically a 12-on-12, half a ground. One team starts with the ball at one end, and the other team sort of start, off to the left-hand side. And then once they've got the ball, you're trying to slow them down and stop them moving the ball, but they're already going pretty quick. So it's pretty much a replicant of what happens in the game. Do you know what I mean? Because once a team gets going fast with the ball, how do you stop them? How do you slow them down? It's just, it's one of those ones where you're just playing footy and there's no right or wrong answer, but you can sort of see that, you can see the common mistakes and educate those. And when you get pretty good at that drill, you can really slow a side down. And that in modern footy is worth its weight in gold.
So you got 12-on-12 starting at one end of the ground,
yep.
And they both sort of starting side by side. Is that what you're talking about?
No, so one team will occupy half the ground, so the right hand side of the ground.
Yep.
Okay, and they're in their positions all the way from the back, from the back goal square up to halfway.
Yep.
Not a good explanation drill. This one probably need a visual.
No,
for
it is tough to audio.
And then the other side of the ground, the left hand side, is where the defending side stands.
Okay.
So they'll all be off and not ready to go, and then on the whistle, the guy in the back pocket starts the drill, and they'll try to flow. They'll flow down the right hand side, and the guys who are coming on to defend have just got to run on and do their best because the ball's already moving. Yeah. So so it's really hard to slow it down and to stop them, but it's a really good defensive drill. Yeah,
sounds perfect. Is there any other one that you really like to do?
I guess the small-sided games. We had a couple of Saturday mornings at the start of our pre-season last year where we said, we'll just do game-orientated running. So let's call it a 50 by 30 square, but it's only 5v5 handball. So the players do, sort of 2 minutes on and then, a minute off, and they're cooked by the end of those 2 minutes. And it's even numbers, but when you handball through the goals, a coach will feed the ball into the opposition team, and the person who got the goal has to go around a pole at the back. So you're trying to defend with one man short who's chasing from behind. So the team with the ball can always move it, but it's really challenging from a fitness aspect. And it gets a lot more Ks and high speed and cooks the players, and they love it. So that's another one, just a 5v5, but on a really big area. And when the goal's scored, straight into the opposition, and the goal scorer has to go around a pole. So you're basically trying to defend a bit of a man down for a period. So that's one of the players, they love it at the start, but after 5 minutes, they're not loving it so much.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds pretty challenging. Just a few more questions there, Jeff, to finish off with. Do you have any books or documentaries you might recommend listeners get a hold of?
I do, mate, and basic one for coaches, and you've probably read this one, but The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle.
I haven't read that one. No,
it's terrific. It really it talks about quite a few places around the world. You know, a little Russian tennis academy, you know, in the back blocks of Russia somewhere that's produced 4 or 5 world champions, and it talks about the way athletes learn and the training and why, you know, the Brazil has produced so many footballers, and it's all got to go back to the way your athletes learn and improve. So that's a terrific one for coaches. One for players that I've given quite a few of my players over the years. It's called The Inner Game of Tennis. It's a bloody old book. I think it was written in the 70s, but it's all about the little voice in your head and how we overcome that little voice in our head. And, you know, when you first learned to walk, there wasn't a little voice in your head telling you, you know, that you're an idiot when you're mucked up. And if we can overcome that, we're pretty good at learning and improving, you know, just letting the body and the mind do what it was designed to do. So that's definitely one that I've given a few players, and the feedback from the players is, yeah, it's helped and made a difference. And the last one is The Captain Class by Sam Walker. So did a study on great teams around the world, and you had to be pretty exceptional to qualify for his A-grade team. And he did find a similarity between them all, but it wasn't what he expected. And it was in the captains or the leaders of the teams. Now, they were quite different individuals, the way they all went about it, but they also had some similarities. And, you know, if you're interested in building a team and leadership, I reckon it's a great book. So there's a couple for you.
Perfect. No, that'd be great if we get hold of. It's actually interesting. I've got one to add. I was just watching last night. I don't know if you've seen the Dawn Wall. It's on Netflix at the moment. Unbelievable, isn't it? Unbelievable story.
Yep.
I just thought for football, and if I ever did a presentation this preseason, I'd love to do it with some football players. But talking about like dedication to his craft and this monstrous goal, I think it went for 6 years. I think he was trying to get up this particular climb. And even during the climb, just watching the amount of attempts and then going back and not leaving a teammate behind, and there's so many things you could take out of that. I think it was a ripper. So that's it. If you haven't watched it, and he's got an amazing story too when he's in West Asia. Yeah, that's right. And you know, when he got kidnapped and for a week and so forth. But anyway, definitely worth it. If you
like that, mate, there's another. Sorry, mate. There's another one just come out, a book called The Rise of Superman, and it talks about how extreme athletes have been able to really raise the bar more than any other athletes in the last 20 years. And it's all about flow and getting into the zone. And when and extreme athletes, the risk element to that sort of leads them to consistently getting. So that's, there's a lot of work being done in that space in terms of athlete performance, but yeah, you'll love it. It's along that vein. And yeah, those free climbers, they don't get it right, and they don't get in flow in the zone. They're not with us anymore, are they? So yeah, it's amazing.
Unbelievable. If I could give you a banner that goes on the back of bedroom doors of all coaches and players they're going to see day in, day out, what would that banner say?
For a player, it's something along the lines of growth only occurs from a state of discomfort. So it's like we were talking about before, getting uncomfortable, that's when you're growing. You know, you're turning up to training and you're capable and you're just going through the motions and everything's easy. There's no growth there. So that would be for a player. And for a coach, I guess it'd be the leader, lead the way, but then help them through. Our job as a coach is to help our athletes, and some need a bit more help than others, and sometimes helping them is challenging them. But lead them, be the leader, be the role model, and help your athletes, help them through. So that would be, I guess, my player and my coach banners.
Fantastic, Jeff. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for coming on the show, giving us your time. Really appreciate that. And I'm sure listeners will get a lot out of it. So thank you.
Pleasure, Jock. Good luck for the year, mate. Go the Falcons.